In exactly 37 minutes, Lysander Blackwood would make the biggest mistake of his life. And it would involve a woman he'd never even bothered to learn the name of. The grandfather clock in the marble foyer of the Blackwood estate chimed 11 times, its deep bronze notes echoing through halls that had witnessed 3 centuries of family scandals, fortunes made and lost, and hearts broken in the most spectacular fashion. Tonight would add another chapter to that legacy, though nobody knew it yet. Lysander Blackwood, heir to the Blackwood industrial empire valued at $15 billion, stood in his private study adjusting his obsidian cufflinks, a nervous habit he'd developed during hostile takeovers. At 28, he possessed the kind of devastating good looks that graced magazine covers, sharp cheekbones that could cut glass, storm gray eyes that had been known to make seasoned CEOs stutter, and the kind of smile that promised both heaven and hell. Tonight, however, that smile was nowhere to be found. "Sir?" His butler Winston appeared in the doorway, looking more flustered than Lysander had ever seen him in 15 years of service. "There's been a situation." Lysander didn't look up from the merger documents spread across his mahogany desk, papers that would either make him the youngest media mogul in history or destroy everything his family had built since 1847. If the caterers are having another meltdown about the organic ice sculptures, tell them, "It's not the caterers. Sir, it's about the Ashford acquisition papers." Now Lysander's head snapped up. The Ashford deal was worth $2.8 billion and represented 3 years of delicate negotiations to acquire the last independent television network in the country. "What about them?" "They're gone, sir." The words hit Lysander like a physical blow. He lunged toward the wall safe hidden behind a Monet original, his fingers flying over the digital keypad. The safe opened with a soft click, revealing exactly what Winston had feared. Empty shelves where the most important documents of his career should have been. "How is this possible?" Lysander's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Only 4. People know this combination." 5, actually," Winston corrected nervously. "You gave it to Miss Cordelia when she cleaned in here last week, remember? After she accidentally knocked over your brandy and you didn't want the papers to get damaged." Lysander's blood turned to ice. Cordelia, the night cleaning girl with the unusual name and the way of moving through rooms like she was afraid to disturb the very air. He'd given her the combination in a moment of what? Kindness? Stupidity? Where is she now? Still cleaning the East Wing, I believe. But sir, surely you don't think... Lysander was already striding through the corridors of his family mansion, his Italian leather shoes clicking against marble floors that had been installed by his great-great-grandfather. Priceless paintings, blurred past, Picasso's, Van Gogh's, a Klimt that had cost more than most people's houses. But all he could think about was those missing papers and the quiet girl who somehow had access to his most guarded secrets. He found her in the library, standing on a ladder reaching for the highest shelf, a feather duster in her hand. From this angle, he could see she was younger than he'd thought, maybe 25, with rich auburn hair that caught the lamplight like spun copper. She wore the standard gray uniform of the cleaning service, but something about the way she carried herself suggested she was accustomed to finer things. "Cordelia." She startled at his voice, nearly losing her balance on the ladder. Lysander moved instinctively to steady her, his hands grasping her waist as she stepped down. For a moment, they stood frozen in an unexpectedly intimate position, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something expensive and French that definitely didn't match her job description. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, stepping back quickly. "I'm sorry. I didn't expect you to be up so late." Now that he was facing her properly, Lysander felt his breath catch. Cordelia wasn't just pretty. She was stunning in that rare, natural way that couldn't be bought or manufactured. Her eyes were the color of warm honey, intelligent and alert, framed by lashes that most women would kill for. But what struck him most was her voice. Cultured, educated, with just a hint of an accent he couldn't place. "We need to talk," he said, his tone harder than he intended. Something flickered in her eyes. Wariness, maybe even fear. About what? About the papers that went missing from my safe tonight. The color drained from her face. I don't understand. Don't you? Lysander stepped closer, letting his full height and presence intimidate her. It was a tactic that had worked on countless business adversaries. You're the only person outside my family who had access to that safe. You think I stole from you? Her voice was barely above a whisper, but there was steel underneath the softness. The Ashford acquisition documents are worth almost $3 billion. That's a pretty strong motive for someone in your situation. The moment the words left his mouth, Lysander knew he'd crossed a line, but his empire was at stake, and he'd learned long ago that sentiment was a luxury he couldn't afford. Cordelia went very still. When she looked up at him, her honey-colored eyes had turned molten, gold with fury. Someone in my situation? You know what I mean. Actually, I don't think I do. Please enlighten me about my situation, Mr. Blackwood. There was something in her tone that should have warned him, but Lysander was too angry, too desperate, to heed it. You're a cleaning girl who somehow affords French perfume and has access to my private safe. You tell me what that looks like. The silence that followed was so complete, Lysander could hear his own heartbeat. When Cordelia spoke again, her voice was deadly quiet. What it looks like, Mr. Blackwood, is a man so drunk on his own privilege that he can't imagine a world where someone might be more than what they appear. What it looks like is someone so desperate to believe his money makes him superior that he'd rather destroy an innocent person than face the possibility that his perfect little kingdom might have cracks. She stepped closer, and despite her petite stature, Lysander found himself taking an involuntary step back. But here's what you really look like, she continued, her words precise as surgical instruments. You look like a man who has everything money can buy and absolutely nothing money can't. You look like someone so terrified of being ordinary that you need everyone else to be beneath you just to remember you exist. And most pathetically of all, you look like a man who will inherit billions but die completely alone. Because you've never learned the difference between being feared and being loved. The words hit Lysander like physical blows, each one finding its mark with devastating accuracy. You want to know about my situation? Cordelia's voice rose slightly, passion breaking through her controlled facade. My situation is that I have a master's degree in art history from Oxford. My situation is that I speak 5 languages and can identify every painting in this room, including the one you think is a Monet but is actually a very good forgery. My situation is that I'm working here because sometimes life doesn't go according to plan, but I've never forgotten who I am. She paused, letting that sink in before delivering the final devastating blow. Your situation, however, is that you're a man with $15 billion who's still so poor that the only way you can feel rich is by trying to make others feel worthless. And that, Mr. Blackwood, is the saddest fortune I've ever encountered. The library fell silent except for the ticking of the antique clock on the mantel. Lysander stood frozen, feeling as if he'd just been eviscerated by someone wielding nothing but truth as a weapon. Cordelia straightened her shoulders, gathered her cleaning supplies with quiet dignity, and walked toward the door. At the threshold, she turned back. Your papers are probably in your briefcase, by the way. You were reviewing them in the car earlier. I saw you through the window when you arrived, but I suppose it's easier to blame the help than to admit you might have made a simple human mistake. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Lysander alone with the echoes of the most devastating verbal assault he'd ever received. Slowly, mechanically, he walked to his desk and opened his leather briefcase. There, exactly where Cordelia had predicted, were the Ashford acquisition papers. As the grandfather clock chimed midnight, Lysander Blackwood realized that in 37 minutes, he hadn't just made the biggest mistake of his life. He'd met the one woman who might actually be worth changing for. If only he hadn't just destroyed any chance of her ever speaking to him again. Some mistakes haunt you for days. Others change your life in the time it takes to brew the perfect cup of coffee. Lysander Blackwood had not slept. Not 1 minute. He'd spent the entire night pacing his study like a caged panther, replaying every devastating word Cordelia had spoken. By dawn, he'd worn a path in the Persian rug that had survived 2 world wars, but apparently couldn't withstand the aftermath of his spectacular character assassination. At 6:47 a.m., he made a decision that would have shocked anyone who knew him. He was going to apologize. Lysander Blackwood, who had never apologized to anyone in his adult life, not to business rivals, not to ex-girlfriends, not even to his own mother, was going to eat crow served by a woman who cleaned libraries for a living. The problem was, he had no idea how to find her. "Winston," he called, his voice echoing through the mansion's corridors. His butler appeared with the efficiency of a man who'd been anticipating this summons since the moment Cordelia had walked out. "Yes, sir?" "I need Cordelia's address, phone number, something." Winston's expression remained carefully neutral, but Lysander caught the slight tightening around his eyes. "I'm afraid that information is confidential, sir. Fairmont Cleaning Services has very strict privacy policies." "Then call Fairmont. Tell them it's urgent." "It's 6:50 a.m., sir. They won't be open for another 2 hours." Lysander felt the familiar surge of frustration that came when his money and influence couldn't immediately solve a problem. "Fine, then I'll go to their office and wait." "Sir," Winston ventured carefully, "might I suggest you consider what you're going to say when you find her?" That stopped Lysander cold. What was he going to say? "Sorry I accused you of grand theft? My mistake for thinking you were a common criminal?" Every possible apology sounded either pathetic or patronizing in his head. "I'll figure it out," he muttered, grabbing his keys. "Perhaps," Winston said with the sort of diplomatic courage that came from 15 years of managing Blackwood family crises, "you might want to change first." Lysander looked down at himself. He was still wearing his clothes from the night before, now wrinkled and disheveled, and his usually perfect hair looked like he'd been running his hands through it, which he had, repeatedly. "Right," he said, taking the stairs 2 at a time, toward his bedroom. 20 minutes later, showered and dressed in casual clothes that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, Lysander stood outside Fairmont Cleaning Services in downtown Seattle. The building was a far cry from the gleaming corporate towers he was used to, a modest 2-story structure wedged between a coffee shop called The Daily Grind and a vintage bookstore. He checked his Rolex. 8:30 a.m. Still 30 minutes before. They opened. The coffee shop, however, was already bustling with the morning rush. Through the window, he could see a line of customers waiting for their caffeine fix. And behind the counter, a familiar figure with auburn hair pulled back in a ponytail was working the espresso machine with the same efficiency she'd shown while cleaning his library. Cordelia. Lysander's heart did something strange in his chest, a stuttering skip that he'd never experienced before. She was here, in her second job apparently, looking completely different from the quiet cleaning woman he'd met the night before. She wore a bright green apron over jeans and a white t-shirt, and when she laughed at something a customer said, her entire face lit up like sunrise. He pushed through the door, the bell jingling overhead. The coffee shop was warm and inviting, filled with the rich aroma of freshly ground beans and the low hum of morning conversation. Mismatched furniture and local art on the walls gave it a bohemian charm that was the complete opposite of the sterile perfection he was used to. Cordelia looked up from the espresso machine and froze when she saw him. The easy smile vanished from her face, replaced by a carefully neutral expression. "What can I get you?" she asked, her voice professionally polite. Lysander approached the counter, acutely aware that several other customers were watching their interaction with interest. This wasn't how he'd imagined their reunion. Certainly, Not with an audience of caffeine-deprived Seattle residents. He started, then stopped. Every prepared speech he'd mentally rehearsed during the drive over had evaporated. Coffee. Just coffee. What kind? Her tone was patient but cool. Whatever you recommend. Something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, maybe. But she nodded and turned to the machine. Lysander watched her work, noting the practiced efficiency of her movements, the way she seemed to know exactly what she was doing. This wasn't someone just picking up extra hours for money. This was someone who took pride in her craft. Ethiopian single origin, she said, sliding a cup across the counter. Medium roast, notes of chocolate and citrus. Their fingers brushed when he reached for the cup, and Lysander felt an electric jolt that had nothing to do with static electricity. From the way Cordelia quickly pulled her hand back, she'd felt it too. That'll be $4.50, she said. Lysander handed her a 20 without thinking. Keep the change. I don't need your charity, she said quietly, making change with quick, efficient movements. It's not charity. It's a tip. A $15 tip on a $4 coffee is charity. She held out his change with a look that dared him to argue. The customer behind him cleared their throat impatiently. Lysander realized he was holding up the line, but he couldn't leave. Not yet. Cordelia, I'm working. She cut him off. Next customer, please. Dismissed, Lysander moved to a corner table where he could still see the counter. The coffee was excellent, better than anything served at the high-end restaurants he frequented. He watched Cordelia serve customer after customer, noting how she remembered regular orders, how she had a different smile for everyone, how she moved through the small space behind the counter like she belonged there. The morning rush began, to slow around 9:30, and finally, Cordelia stepped out from behind the counter with a cleaning rag, wiping down empty tables. When she reached his table, she paused. We're not open for loitering, she said, without looking at him. I want to apologize. Congratulations, you've apologized. You can go now. That wasn't an apology. That was a statement of intent. Despite herself, Cordelia's lips twitched slightly. You're going to have to do better than that, Mr. Blackwood. Lysander, he said. My name is Lysander. I know what your name is. I also know that you think I'm a thief. I don't. I was wrong. Now she did look at him, and Lysander felt the full force of those honey-colored eyes. You were wrong about what exactly? This was it. The moment where he had to choose between his pride and what? What did he want from this woman? I was wrong about everything, he said quietly. I was wrong to accuse you. I was wrong to assume things about you based on your job. I was wrong. To treat you like you were beneath me when you're obviously, he gestured helplessly, when you're obviously not. Cordelia studied him for a long moment. Obviously not what? Beneath me. Anyone, really. He struggled for words that wouldn't sound condescending. You're extraordinary. Because I have a degree from Oxford? No. Because you stood up to me when no one else ever has. Because you spoke 5 languages and noticed the forgery when I've been staring at that painting for years without seeing it. Because you work 2 jobs and still carry yourself like a queen. The silence stretched between them, filled with the distant sound of the espresso machine and morning traffic outside. 3 jobs, Cordelia said finally. What? I work 3 jobs, not 2. Cleaning service, coffee shop, and I teach art history at the community college on weekends. She sat down across from him, her defenses lowering slightly. And it's not because I like being busy. It's because my little brother needs physical therapy that insurance won't cover, and my mother's medications cost more than most people's. Rent. Lysander felt something twist painfully in his chest. I didn't know. Of course you didn't. You didn't bother to ask. She traced patterns on the table with her finger. You saw the uniform and made assumptions, just like everyone else. I'm not everyone else, aren't you? She looked up at him, and for the first time, he saw vulnerability underneath the strength. You're Lysander Blackwood. You live in a mansion. You drive cars that cost more than most people make in a year, and you think the world revolves around your convenience. You're right, he said, the admission surprising them both. I am all of those things, but I want to be different. Why? It was a simple question with a complicated answer. Why did he want to change? Because she'd called him out on his privilege? Because she was beautiful? Because she was the first person in years to treat him like a human being instead of a bank account? Because, he said finally, I met someone last night who made me realize that all the money in the world doesn't mean anything if you're too poor in spirit to deserve it. Cordelia's eyes widened slightly. Then, to his amazement, she smiled. Not the polite customer service smile, but something real and warm that transformed her entire face. That, she said, is the first genuine thing you've said since you walked in here. Does that mean you'll let me make it up to you? Depends. What did you have in mind? Lysander felt a grin tugging at his lips, the first genuine smile he'd felt in months. How do you feel about expensive dinners? I feel like they're a waste of money when there are perfectly good food trucks outside. Food trucks it is, then. Cordelia laughed, a sound like silver bells that made something warm unfurl in Lysander's chest. You know what? I get off at 2. There's a Korean BBQ truck on Pine Street that serves the best bulgogi in the city. It's a date, Lysander said, then immediately wondered if he'd overstepped. It's lunch, Cordelia corrected, but she was still smiling. And you're buying. Deal. As Lysander left the coffee shop, he felt lighter than he had in years. Behind him, he could hear Cordelia humming as she returned to work, and for the first time in his life, he understood what people meant when they talked about having something to look forward to. The question was, would a woman who worked 3 jobs and had every reason to hate him give him a chance to prove he could be more than just another rich man with too much money and too little soul? At 2 p.m., he was going to find out. The difference between a billionaire and everyone else isn't money, it's the ability to order Korean BBQ without checking the price first. At exactly 1:58 p.m., Lysander stood in front of Kim's Kitchen food truck on Pine Street, feeling more nervous than he had during his first hostile takeover. He'd changed clothes 3 times, finally settling on dark jeans and a simple gray sweater that probably cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget, but at least didn't scream, I own several small countries. The food truck was nothing, like the upscale restaurants he frequented. It was a converted Airstream trailer painted bright red with Korean characters on the side, surrounded by a small crowd of office workers, college students, and construction workers all waiting in line. The smell of grilling meat and garlic filled the air, making his stomach growl despite his nerves. You actually showed up. He turned to find Cordelia approaching, looking completely different from both the cleaning woman and the barista he'd met. She wore fitted dark jeans, ankle boots, and a soft lavender sweater that brought out the gold flecks in her eyes. Her auburn hair was loose around her shoulders, catching the afternoon sunlight, and she carried a vintage leather messenger bag that looked both expensive and well-loved. Did you think I wouldn't? He asked. Honestly? I thought you'd send your assistant with an apology note and a check. Lysander winced. Have I really given you such a low opinion of me? Well, you did accuse me of grand theft less than 24 hours ago. Point taken. He gestured toward the food truck. So, what's good here? Everything. But if you want the full experience, we're getting the bulgogi combo with kimchi fried rice and japchae. She paused, studying his face. Unless you're one of those people who think spicy food is too exotic? I'll have you know I once ate at a very exclusive Korean fusion restaurant in Manhattan. Cordelia's eyebrow arched dangerously. Fusion? Is that bad? Lysander Blackwood, she said with mock solemnity. You haven't lived until you've had authentic Korean street food prepared by a grandmother who doesn't speak English, but somehow knows exactly what your soul needs. As if summoned by her words, an elderly Korean woman appeared at the food truck window, her face lighting up when she saw Cordelia. Delia, my favorite customer, the woman called out in accented English, then launched into rapid Korean. Cordelia responded fluently, her entire demeanor changing as she chatted with the older woman. She laughed at something, then gestured toward Lysander while speaking Korean. What did you just say about me? Lysander asked suspiciously. I told her you're a friend who's never had real Korean food before, and she should make sure you get the full experience. That's all? Cordelia's smile turned impish. I may have also mentioned that you're very rich and probably tip well. Cordelia. What? It's true, isn't it? The older woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Kim, proceeded to load them up with enough food to feed a small army, refusing to let Lysander pay until she'd personally inspected his order and added extra banchan, side dishes, for the handsome boy who needs more meat on his bones. They found seats at a small picnic table nearby, the food spread out between them like a Korean feast. Lysander stared at the array of colorful dishes, feeling completely out of his depth. Okay, Cordelia said, noticing his hesitation. Korean Food 101. This is bulgogi, marinated beef that's been grilled to perfection. This is kimchi fried rice. And this is japchae, sweet potato noodles with vegetables. And these, she gestured to the small dishes, are banchan. Think of them as the opening act for the main event. You really do speak Korean, among other languages. Turns out when you grow up moving around a lot, you pick things up. She took a bite of bulgogi and sighed contentedly. So, confession time. Why are you really here? I told you. I wanted to apologize. You already apologized. This feels like something else. Lysander set down his chopsticks, which he was wielding with surprising competence, and looked at her directly. You're right. I have an ulterior motive. I knew it. But she didn't sound angry, just curious. I want to understand how you do it. Do what? How you manage to be so content. You work 3 jobs. You're dealing with family, medical expenses. You're cleaning offices and serving coffee. And yet you seem genuinely happy. I have everything money can buy, and I can't remember the last time I felt the way you looked when you were talking to Mrs. Kim. Cordelia was quiet for a moment, studying his face. You know, most people who ask me that question are usually looking for some kind of inspirational quote they can post on social media. I'm not most people. No, you're not. She took another bite, chewing thoughtfully. The truth is, I wasn't always content. 3 years ago, I was exactly where you'd expect someone with my education to be, working at a prestigious art museum in New York, climbing the career ladder, living in a tiny apartment that cost half my salary. What happened? My brother was in a car accident. Traumatic brain injury, multiple surgeries, months of rehabilitation. My mother couldn't handle it alone, so I came home to help. She shrugged. The prestigious job didn't come with me, and the bills didn't stop coming. That must have been devastating. It was. For about 6 months, I was angry at everyone and everything. Angry at the universe for derailing my perfect life plan. Angry at my family for needing me. Angry at myself for caring more about them than my career. She met his eyes. Want to know what changed? What? I realized that my perfect life had been making me miserable. I was so focused on achieving some arbitrary definition of success that I'd forgotten what actually mattered to me. My family, connections with people, making a difference in small ways. She gestured around them at the bustling street scene. "This might not look like much to you, but I get to teach kids about art history. I know every regular customer's coffee, order by heart, and Mrs. Kim sends me home with extra kimchi because she worries I'm too skinny. And that's enough? It's everything." She leaned forward slightly. "Here's what I think your problem is, Lysander. You've been measuring your worth by what you have instead of who you are. But the thing about having everything is that it leaves you nothing to work toward, nothing to appreciate, nothing to be grateful for. So what do you suggest? I give away my fortune and become a barista?" Cordelia laughed. "God, no. The world has enough brooding rich guys who think poverty is romantic. I'm suggesting you figure out what actually makes you happy. Not what you think should make you happy, but what genuinely lights you up inside. What if I don't know? Then you start experimenting. Try new things. Talk to different people. Stop surrounding yourself with people who only tell you what you want to hear." She grinned. "Eat more Korean food. Is that your prescription for happiness? Korean food? Korean food is just the beginning. It's about being open to experiences that don't come with a price tag and a prestige label." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, watching the street life flow around them. Office workers hurried past, street musicians played on corners, and the city hummed with the energy of thousands of people living their lives. For the first time in years, Lysander felt like he was part of something larger than himself. "Can I ask you something?" he said eventually. "Shoot." "Why did you agree to have lunch with me? After everything I said last night, you had every right to never speak to me again." Cordelia considered this, twirling japchae around her chopsticks. "Honestly, because you looked so miserable when you left the coffee shop this morning. And because..." She hesitated. "Because what?" "Because I recognized something in you. That look of someone who has everything they thought they wanted and can't figure out why it feels like nothing. You've felt that way? Everyone has, at some point. The difference is, most people don't have the luxury of wallowing in existential crisis. They're too busy trying to pay rent." Ouch. Truth hurts, but she smiled when she said it. "The good news is, it's fixable. You just have to be willing to do the work." "What kind of work?" "The kind that doesn't come with a guaranteed return on investment." She checked her phone. "Speaking of work, I need to get going. I have class at the community college in an hour." "Right, of course." Lysander felt a strange pang of disappointment. This was nice, different. Different good or different bad? Different perfect. Something warm flashed in Cordelia's eyes. "Maybe we could do different perfect again sometime." "I'd like that, a lot." As they gathered their trash, Mrs. Kim called out from the food truck window, shouting something in Korean that made Cordelia blush. "What did she say now?" Lysander asked. "She said you're much more handsome when you smile, and I should bring you back soon." "Smart woman." "The smartest." Cordelia shouldered her bag. "Same time tomorrow? I know a taco truck that makes the best carnitas in the city." "It's a date. It's a date," Cordelia agreed, standing on her tiptoes to kiss his cheek, quickly. "See you tomorrow, Lysander." As she walked away, Lysander touched his cheek where her lips had been, feeling like he'd just won the lottery. Which, considering he'd never felt this way about actual lottery, winnings, was saying something. For the first time in his adult life, he was looking forward to tomorrow not because of a business deal or acquisition, but because he was going to see a woman who made Korean food taste like happiness and made him want to be worthy of her smile. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was exactly what he'd been missing without even knowing it. The moment you realize you're falling in love is usually the exact moment everything goes spectacularly wrong. Lysander had been looking forward to their taco truck date for exactly 18 hours, 12 minutes, and he checked his Rolex. 37 seconds. He'd actually canceled a board meeting, which his assistant Marcus had stared at him for, so long that Lysander wondered if the man was having a stroke. "Sir," Marcus had said carefully, "the Yamamoto Industries meeting has been scheduled for 3 months. Reschedule it." "For when?" "I don't know. Next week, next month, when I'm not busy." "Busy doing what exactly?" Lysander had paused, realizing he couldn't exactly say, "eating street tacos with a woman who makes me forget I'm a billionaire." Instead, he'd gone with personal matters. Marcus had made a note that probably said something like, "Boss has finally had nervous breakdown," but had dutifully rescheduled the meeting. Now, standing in front of Lupe's authentic tacos at 2 p.m. sharp, Lysander felt that familiar flutter of anticipation mixed with terror. He was wearing jeans again, something that would have been unthinkable a week ago, and had even practiced eating tacos the night before with his chef, which had resulted in the most surreal cooking lesson of his life. Mr. Blackwood, his chef, Henri had said in his thick French accent, "Perhaps we could prepare something more refined? Filet mignon tacos with truffle oil?" "No, Henri, regular tacos, like normal people eat." "But sir, you are not normal people." That, Lysander reflected as he waited for Cordelia, was exactly the problem. "You're early," came a familiar voice behind him. He turned to find Cordelia approaching, and felt his breath catch exactly the way it had yesterday. Today she wore a flowing emerald green dress that moved like water when she walked, paired with worn leather boots and a denim jacket. She looked effortlessly beautiful in a way that probably took zero effort, which was deeply unfair to every other woman on the planet. "I was eager," he admitted. "For tacos or for company?" "Yes." That earned him one of her genuine smiles, the kind that made his chest do strange things. "Good answer." They approached Lupe's truck, which was painted bright yellow with a cartoon cactus wearing a sombrero. The smell of grilled meat, onions, and fresh tortillas made Lysander's mouth water, despite his usual preference for meals that required more than one fork. "Delia!" called out a man from the truck window, middle-aged, with graying hair and kind eyes. "¿Cómo estás, mija?" Cordelia responded in rapid Spanish, gesturing toward Lysander with what he was beginning to recognize as her introducing the rich guy expression. "What did you tell him?" Lysander asked suspiciously. "That you're new to authentic Mexican food, and he should go easy on the habaneros." "That's it?" "And that you tip really well." "Cordelia." "What? Do you not tip?" "Well, that's not the point," she laughed, and Lysander realized he was falling in love with that sound. Which was problematic for several reasons, not least of which was that he'd known her for approximately 36 hours. Luis, as he introduced himself, proceeded to educate Lysander on the fine art of taco construction while preparing their order. "You see, amigo, the secret is in the balance. Meat, onion, cilantro, salsa. Each bite should be perfect harmony." "Like a symphony," Lysander said, trying to show he understood. "Exactamente. You get it." They found seats at a small table nearby, and Lysander carefully picked up his first authentic street taco, trying to remember Henry's instruction about structural integrity in handheld foods. "You're overthinking it," Cordelia observed, amused. "I don't want to—" The taco promptly fell apart in his hands, sending carnitas and onions cascading onto his plate. "Do that." "It's an art form," Cordelia said solemnly, then demonstrated the proper technique with fluid grace. "You have to respect the taco." "Respect the taco," Lysander repeated seriously, reconstructing his meal. "Are you mocking me?" "Never. I'm a fast learner when properly motivated." "And what's motivating you?" "The teacher." The words slipped out before he could stop them, and suddenly the air between them felt charged with something electric. Cordelia's cheeks flushed pink, and she looked down at her food. "That's a dangerous thing to say," she said quietly. "Why?" Because I might start believing you mean it. I do mean it. She looked up at him then, and for a moment, the busy street around them faded into background noise. There was something in her eyes. Hope, maybe, mixed with wariness. Lysander. Well, isn't this precious? The voice cut through their moment like a chainsaw through silk. Lysander's blood turned to ice as he recognized the speaker before he even turned around. Vivian Ashford stood behind them in designer heels and a suit that probably cost more than Louise made in a month. Her platinum blonde hair was pulled back in a severe chignon, and her smile was the kind that preceded corporate massacres. Vivian, Lysander said carefully, what are you doing here? I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd see what passes for cuisine in this charming area. Her gaze swept over their plastic table and paper plates with barely concealed disdain. Though I have to say, I never expected to find Seattle's most eligible bachelor slumming it with the help. Cordelia went very still beside him. Vivian? Lysander's voice carried a warning. Oh, don't mind me, Vivian continued, her tone honeyed poison. I think it's wonderful that you're exploring your charitable side. Very humanitarian of you. I think you should leave, Lysander said, standing up. Before I've had a chance to properly meet your little friend. Vivian turned her predatory smile on Cordelia, who had remained seated but was now looking at Vivian, with the expression of someone evaluating a particularly interesting specimen. I'm Vivian Ashford, Lysander's fiancée. The word hit like a physical blow. Lysander saw Cordelia flinch, saw her face go carefully blank. Ex-fiancée, he corrected quickly. We broke up 8 months ago. Oh, darling, Vivian laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. You know, that was just a little misunderstanding. Daddy's been quite insistent that we work things out, especially now that the merger is back on track. What merger? Cordelia asked quietly. Oh, hasn't he told you? Vivian's eyes glittered with malicious delight. The Ashford-Blackwood merger. Our companies, our families, our future. It's all very romantic, really. Billions of dollars and true love combined. Lysander felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. Vivian, that merger fell through months ago. Did it? Because Daddy seems to think otherwise. In fact, he's expecting an announcement quite soon. She smiled at Cordelia. I do hope you understand, dear. This little dalliance was fun, I'm sure, but Lysander has responsibilities. To his family, to his company, to his class. His class, Cordelia repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. Well, yes. I mean, surely you didn't think this was serious. Men like Lysander don't marry cleaning ladies. They marry people who can contribute to their legacy. Vivian's smile turned pitying, though I suppose the experience has been educational for both of you. The silence that followed was deafening. Lysander could hear his own heartbeat, could see the exact moment when Cordelia's walls slammed back into place. You know what? Cordelia said, standing up with fluid grace. You're absolutely right. Cordelia, don't, Lysander started. No, she's right, Cordelia continued, her voice steady as steel. This was educational. I learned that some people are exactly who they appear to be, no matter how much you want to believe otherwise. That's not what she meant, isn't it? Cordelia looked at him with eyes that had gone cold as winter. Tell me, Lysander, is there a merger being discussed? The pause before his answer was a heartbeat too long. Yes, but... And is she your ex-fiancée? Yes, but... And did you know she would be here today? No, But you did know about the merger when you asked me to lunch yesterday. Lysander felt trapped, every answer leading to deeper quicksand. It's not what you think. What I think, Cordelia said with devastating calm, is that I was right the first time. You are exactly who you appear to be. She turned to Vivian. Congratulations on your engagement. I hope you'll be very happy together. Cordelia, wait. But she was already walking away, her head held high, leaving Lysander standing next to a smirking Vivian and the wreckage of what might have been the best thing that had ever happened to him. Well, Vivian said, checking her manicure. That was easier than I expected. Shall we go somewhere more appropriate for lunch? I have reservations at Le Bernardin. Lysander stared after Cordelia's retreating figure, feeling something crack open in his chest. For the second time in 2 days, she'd walked away from him. But this time, he wasn't sure he'd get another chance to make things right. Actually, Vivian, he said slowly, I think I'll stay here and finish my tacos. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. He sat back down, picked up his reconstructed taco, and took a deliberate bite. And for the record, there is no merger. There never will be a merger. And if you ever speak to Cordelia like that again, I'll make sure every business publication in the country knows exactly what kind of person you really are. Vivian's face went pale beneath her makeup. You wouldn't dare. Try me. After she stormed, off in a cloud of expensive perfume and wounded pride, Lysander sat alone at the plastic table, eating tacos that now tasted like cardboard, and wondering how he'd managed to lose the most important thing in his life to a woman he'd already forgotten he ever loved. The answer, he realized, was simple, because he'd been too much of a coward to fight for what mattered when it counted. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to change that. They say money can't buy love, but nobody ever mentioned what happens when you're willing to give it all away for the right person. Lysander Blackwood had been staring at his phone for exactly 43 minutes, typing and deleting the same text message over and over. How do you apologize for being exactly the person someone thought you were when you desperately hoped you were someone else? Cordelia, I can explain. Delete. I know how this looks, but delete. Vivienne was lying about delete. His penthouse office felt smaller than usual, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Seattle's skyline suddenly seeming like prison bars instead of a view of his kingdom. For the first time in his life, all the power and money in the world felt utterly useless. Sir? Winston appeared in the doorway, carrying what looked suspiciously like hot chocolate instead of the usual coffee. I thought you might need this. I need a time machine, Lysander muttered, accepting the mug. Or a lobotomy. Either would work. Might I suggest starting with a simple phone call? She won't answer. Would you? Winston considered this with the diplomatic care of someone who'd spent 15 years managing Blackwood family disasters. Probably not. But then again, I've never been in love with someone who was. Lysander nearly choked on his hot chocolate. Who said anything about love? Sir, you've been carrying your phone around like it's the crown jewels. You canceled the Yamamoto meeting to eat street food, and you just asked our head chef to teach you how to make Korean fried rice from scratch, not the fancy version. If that's not love, it's a very specific form of mental breakdown. Before Lysander could formulate a response, his assistant Marcus burst through the door with the kind of barely controlled panic usually reserved for natural disasters. Sir, we have a problem. Actually, multiple problems. Vivian Ashford just held a press conference. Lysander's blood turned to ice. About what? Marcus turned on the office's massive television, and there was Vivian, in all her perfectly coiffed glory, standing in front of a wall of microphones with her father, Charles Ashford, beside her. Excited to announce the rekindling of my engagement to Lysander Blackwood, Vivian was saying with a smile that could have powered a small city. The merger between Ashford Industries and Blackwood Enterprises will create the largest media conglomerate in North American history, and we couldn't be happier to unite our families as well as our companies. What? Lysander roared, causing both Winston and Marcus to flinch. There's more, Marcus said weakly, turning up the volume. The wedding will take place next month at the Blackwood estate, Vivian continued, in what promises to be the social event of the decade. Lysander is, of course, thrilled, though he's been too busy with merger preparations to join me today. A reporter shouted a question. Miss Ashford, there are rumors that Mr. Blackwood has been seen around the city with other women recently. Can you comment? Vivian's laugh was like tinkling glass filled with poison. Oh, that. Lysander has always been very generous with his time when it comes to charity work. He's been mentoring some of the less fortunate members of our community. It's one of the things I love most about him, his dedication to lifting up those in need. The television went silent except for the sound of Lysander's molars grinding. Together. Sir, Winston said carefully, perhaps it's time for that phone call? But even as Lysander reached for his phone, it started buzzing with incoming calls. Marcus was fielding what sounded like every business reporter in the country, while his personal phone showed 17 missed calls from his mother, 12 from his sister, and 1 from his lawyer, and nothing from Cordelia. I need to find her, Lysander said suddenly. Sir, perhaps you should address the press conference first. No. Everything else can wait. He grabbed his jacket. Marcus, draft a statement denying everything Vivian just said. Winston, cancel everything on my schedule for the rest of the week. The rest of the week? Winston's eyebrows shot up to his hairline. However long it takes. Lysander's first stop was the daily grind, but the teenager behind the counter, definitely not Cordelia, informed him that she'd called in sick. His second stop was the Fairmont Cleaning Services office, where a suspicious receptionist told him that employee information was confidential, and maybe he should try calling like a normal person. His third stop was the community college, where he had to explain to 3 different administrators that he needed to find Cordelia Chen, who taught weekend art history classes. No, he wasn't a student. Yes, he knew how ridiculous he sounded. Finally, a kind-faced woman in the art department took pity on him. You're the one, she said, studying his face with interest. I'm the what? The billionaire. Cordelia mentioned you. The woman, Professor Martinez, according to her name. Tag smiled. She said you were either going to break her heart or save it, and she wasn't sure which would be worse. Lysander felt something twist painfully in his chest. Is she here? She's in classroom 237, setting up for Monday's lecture. But honey, Professor Martinez placed a gentle hand on his arm. She's been crying. Whatever you did, you better have one hell of an apology ready. Classroom 237 was at the end of a long corridor that smelled like chalk and industrial carpet. Through the small window in the door, Lysander could see Cordelia arranging art books on a desk, her movements precise but mechanical. She'd changed into dark jeans and an oversized gray sweater, and her hair was pulled back in a messy bun that somehow made her look both younger and more fragile. He knocked softly. She looked up, and even from across the room, he could see that her eyes were red-rimmed. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she walked to the door and opened it. What are you doing here? Her voice was carefully neutral. I saw the press conference. Congratulations. I'm sure you'll be very happy. Cordelia, I need you to listen to me. Actually, you don't need anything from me anymore. She started to close the door, but he put his hand against it. Please. 5 minutes. And why? So you can explain how this is all some big misunderstanding? How Vivian got it wrong? How the merger isn't really happening? Because the merger isn't really happening, he said desperately. And because I'm in love with you. The words hung in the air between them like a bridge. Neither of them was sure they could cross. You're in love with me, Cordelia repeated flatly. Yes. Since when? Since yesterday. Since the moment you told me I had $15 billion but was still poor. Since I watched you speak Korean to Mrs. Kim and realized I'd never seen anyone light up the way you do when you're genuinely happy. And the merger? Was my father's idea. Something Vivian's father suggested months ago that I never agreed to. I've been avoiding the conversation, which was apparently stupid because my silence gave Vivian room to make assumptions. Cordelia was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. And the engagement? Fake, completely fake. I found out about it the same time you did. Prove it. How? Call your lawyer, right now, in front of me. Have him draft a public statement denying the engagement and the merger. Lysander pulled out his phone without hesitation and dialed. Richard, it's Lysander. I need you to draft a statement. Yes, right now. No, I don't care what time it is in your time zone. Because I'm about to lose the most important thing in my life if I don't fix this in the next 5 minutes. He held the phone so Cordelia could hear both sides of the conversation as he dictated a statement categorically denying any engagement to Vivian Ashford and any merger discussions between their companies. Send it to every major news outlet. Immediately, he finished. And Richard, if my father calls you about this, refer him to me. When he hung up, Cordelia was staring at him with an unreadable expression. That's going to cause problems for you, she said quietly. Probably. Your family won't be happy. Definitely. You might lose business deals. Almost certainly. And you're okay with that? Lysander stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her honey-colored eyes. I've spent my entire life making decisions based on what other people expected from me. My father expected me to take over the company. Society expected me to marry someone from the right family. Everyone expected me to be the perfect heir to the perfect fortune. And I don't want to be perfect anymore. I want to be happy. I want to eat Korean food and learn to respect tacos and figure out how to be worthy of someone who works 3 jobs and still has more joy in her life than I've ever had in mine. Lysander, I know this is crazy. I know we've only known each other for 3 days. I know you have every reason not to trust me. But I also know that I'd rather spend one day being genuinely myself with you than a lifetime being perfectly miserable without you. Tears were starting to form in Cordelia's eyes, but she blinked them back. What are you saying? I'm saying I choose you. Over the merger, over my family's expectations, over everything. I'm saying that if you'll let me, I want to spend the rest of my life trying to be the man you saw in me before Vivian showed up and reminded us both of who I used to be. And if I say no, then I'll respect that, but I'll also keep showing up at Korean food trucks and coffee shops and community college art departments until you believe that this, he gestured between them, is real. The silence stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Finally, Cordelia spoke. There's something you should know about me. What? I don't do things halfway. If we're going to try this, if I'm going to trust you with my heart, then I need all of you. Not the billionaire, not the heir, not the guy trying to prove he's different. Just you. That's all I want to be. Even if just me means giving up some of the life you're used to. Especially then. Cordelia smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her since Vivian had appeared, and Lysander felt like he could breathe again. Okay, she said. Okay? Okay, let's try this. But I have conditions. Anything. First, no more surprise. Ex-fiancé. Done. Second, you have to meet my family. My mother is going to grill you like a detective, and my brother is going to ask you approximately 1,000 questions about your car. I can handle that. Third, her smile turned mischievous. You have to let me teach you how to cook. Real food. None of this my chef will prepare something nonsense. Deal. And fourth, she stepped closer, close enough that he could smell that familiar vanilla scent. You have to trust me enough to be honest about what scares you, About us, about your family, about everything. What scares me, Lysander said, reaching up to cup her face gently, is how much I need you. I've never needed anyone before. That's a good start, she whispered. And when he kissed her, soft and tentative at first, then deeper when she kissed him back, Lysander finally understood what people meant when they talked about feeling complete. Outside, his phone was buzzing with what were probably very angry calls from very important people. Tomorrow, he'd have to deal with his family, the press, and the fallout from choosing love over legacy. But right now, in a classroom that smelled like chalk and possibility, none of that mattered. Right now, he was exactly where he belonged. 6 months later, Lysander Blackwood discovered that the best investment he'd ever made wasn't in stocks, bonds, or real estate. It was in learning how to burn dinner without burning down his relationship. The smoke alarm was shrieking like a banshee with trust issues. Lysander was frantically waving a dish towel at the ceiling, and somewhere in the chaos, Cordelia was laughing so hard she could barely stand upright. "I told you to watch the garlic!" she managed between gasps. "I was watching it, very intently, right up until it burst into flames." "Garlic doesn't burst into flames, Lysander. You turn the heat up to volcanic. The recipe said medium-high. Medium-high, not surface of the sun." The smoke detector finally stopped its indignant wailing, and Lysander surveyed the wreckage of what was supposed to have been a romantic dinner for two. His modest downtown apartment, a shocking downsizing from the penthouse that had raised his mother's blood pressure to dangerous levels, looked like a war zone. Flour dusted every surface, there were eggshells in the sink, and something that might once have been pasta sauce had achieved sentience and was now exploring the backsplash. "You know," Cordelia said, wiping tears from her eyes, "when I said I wanted to teach you to cook, I didn't mean I wanted you to recreate the Great Chicago Fire in your kitchen." Very funny. But Lysander was grinning as he said it. 6 months ago, burning dinner would have sent him into a rage of embarrassment. Now, covered in flour and watching the woman he loved dissolve into giggles, he felt nothing but happiness. "Pizza?" "Pizza," she agreed, already reaching for her phone. "But you're answering the door. I'm not letting the delivery guy see me, looking like I wrestled with a pasta machine and lost." "You look beautiful," he said, and meant it. Cordelia's hair was escaping from its ponytail, she had tomato sauce on her cheek, and her vintage band t-shirt was dusted with flour. She looked absolutely perfect. "You're biased." "Extremely." He pulled her into his arms, not caring about the mess they were both covered in, and completely, helplessly, ridiculously in love with you. "Even when I laugh at your culinary disasters?" "Especially then." She stood on her tiptoes to kiss him, soft and sweet, and Lysander marveled, not for the first time, at how she'd managed to turn his entire world upside down and somehow make everything feel right side up. "So," she said against his lips, "ready to hear about my day?" "Always." This had become their evening ritual. After 6 months of learning how to be in a real relationship, they'd developed rhythms that felt as natural as breathing. Cordelia would tell him about her day, her students at the community college, the regulars at the coffee shop, the stories her cleaning clients didn't know she overheard. In return, he'd share the increasingly surreal experience of running a billion-dollar company while trying to be a decent human being. "Mrs. Patterson brought me cookies again," Cordelia said, settling onto his couch while they waited for pizza. "She's convinced I'm too skinny and that you're not feeding me properly. Mrs. Patterson has seen me exactly once, and I was carrying takeout containers. She's very observant. Also, she wants to know when you're going to propose." Lysander nearly choked on his water. "She what?" "Relax," Cordelia laughed. "I told her we're taking things slow, which reminded me, your mother called the coffee shop today." "My mother called your workplace?" Lysander felt his blood pressure. Spike. What did she want? To invite me to Sunday dinner. Apparently, she's decided that if you're going to keep slumming it, her words, not mine, she might as well get to know the woman who's corrupted her son into happiness. Those were actually her words. Direct quote, "I like your mother. You like that she called me corrupted. I like that she used happiness like it was a communicable disease." Cordelia curled up against his side, fitting perfectly under his arm. She also mentioned that Vivian's engagement to the oil executive lasted exactly 3 weeks. "Good. For her," Lysander said, and was surprised to find he meant it. "They deserve each other. Very magnanimous of you. I'm a changed man." "You're a man who just tried to flambe garlic bread." "That was an accident." The pizza arrived, saving Lysander from further culinary humiliation, and they settled in for what had become their favorite kind of evening. Takeout, terrible television, and the kind of comfortable conversation that comes when two people know they're exactly where they belong. "Oh," Cordelia said around a bite of pizza, "I almost forgot. I have news." "Good news or we need wine news?" "Good news. Great news, actually." She turned to face him fully, her eyes bright with excitement. "The museum called. They want me back." Lysander felt his heart stop. "Back?" "They're opening a new modern art wing, and they need a curator. Full-time, excellent salary, all the benefits." Her smile was radiant. "It's everything I thought I wanted 3 years ago. That's..." Lysander struggled to find words that weren't "please don't leave me." "That's amazing, Cordelia. You deserve it." "I do deserve it," she agreed. "Which is why I turned them down." "You what?" "I turned them down," she repeated calmly. "I told them I wasn't interested." "But why? This is your dream job." "No," she said gently. "It was my dream job 3 years ago. Before I learned the difference between a career and a calling, I don't understand." Cordelia set down her pizza and took his hands. 3 years ago, I thought success meant climbing ladders and impressing people who would never remember my name. I thought I had to choose between having a prestigious career and having a meaningful life. And now? Now I know that's garbage. I love teaching. I love seeing 18-year-olds discover Monet for the first time. I love that Mrs. Kim saves me extra kimchi, and that Professor Martinez asks my opinion on new acquisitions, and that you've learned to make coffee exactly the way I like it even though you're still terrible at everything else in the kitchen. Hey, it's true, and you know it. She smiled. The point is, I don't want their dream anymore. I want my own. What does your dream look like? Well, she said, her cheeks flushing slightly. It looks like opening my own gallery. Somewhere, small and intimate, where I can showcase local artists and teach workshops and host community events. Somewhere that feels like home. Cordelia, that's brilliant. It's also expensive and risky and completely terrifying. It's perfect, Lysander said firmly, and I want to help. I'm not taking your money. I'm not offering my money. I'm offering my connections, my expertise, my complete and total belief in your vision. He paused. And maybe my money, but only as an investor. I want to be your business partner. You want to go into the art gallery business? I want to go into the making you happy business. If that involves art galleries, then I want in. Cordelia stared at him for a long moment, and Lysander held his breath. 6 months ago, she would have said no immediately. 6 months ago, she would have seen it as charity, as him trying to fix her problems with his checkbook. Equal partners? She asked finally. Equal partners. I make all the artistic decisions. Absolutely. You handle the business side, but you run everything by me first. Deal. And when you inevitably try to micromanage something, I get to lock you out of the gallery for a week. That seems fair. She kissed him then, fierce and joyful, and Lysander felt like he'd just won the lottery. Again. "There's one more thing," she said when they broke apart. "What's that?" "Your mother invited both of us to Sunday dinner. She specifically mentioned that she's making her famous pot roast and that she expects you to bring wine that costs less than her car. She's testing you." "I know. I'm bringing homemade bread and my mother's kimchi. Fight fire with fire." "You're going to fit right in," Lysander said, and realized it was completely true. Somehow, in the space of 6 months, Cordelia had become part of his family. Not by changing who she was, but by being so authentically herself that everyone else had no choice but to love her. "Speaking of fitting in," Cordelia said, settling, back against his chest, "Javier wants to know if you're coming to his birthday party next week." Javier was her brother, the one who'd been in the accident, who was now walking again thanks to physical therapy that Lysander's health insurance donations had helped fund. He was also, at 23, possibly the most enthusiastic car enthusiast on the planet, and had taken it upon himself to educate Lysander on real automobiles versus pretty rich boy toys. "Of course I'm coming. What's the theme this year?" "80s karaoke. He specifically requested that you perform Don't Stop Believin' as a duet with him." "I don't sing." "You will for Javier." "I really don't sing." "Lysander Blackwood, you are going to get up on that karaoke stage and sing Journey with my little brother, and you are going to smile while doing it." "Yes, ma'am." "Good. And wear something normal. Jeans and a t-shirt. No designer anything." "I own non-designer clothing now." "You own 3 t-shirts, and 2 of them still have the tags on." "I'm working on it." As the evening wound down and they settled in to watch a ridiculously romantic movie that Cordelia had picked specifically to make him squirm, Lysander reflected on how much his life had changed. 6 months ago, he'd been living in a penthouse, eating 7-course meals prepared by a French chef, and measuring his worth by the size of his portfolio. Now he lived in a normal apartment, burned dinner on a regular basis, and measured his worth by the sound of Cordelia's laughter. It was the best trade he'd ever made. "Lysander," Cordelia said sleepily, curled up against his side as the credits rolled. "I love you too, just in case you were wondering." "I wasn't wondering," he said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "But I never get tired of hearing it." "Good. Because I plan on saying it for a very long time." Outside, Seattle sparkled in the darkness, full of millions of people living their own love stories. But inside his modest apartment, surrounded by the evidence of their perfectly imperfect evening, Lysander knew he had everything he'd ever need. After all, some fortunes can't be measured in dollars and cents. Some investments pay dividends, in laughter, in trust, in the simple joy of finding someone who loves you not for what you have, but for who you are when you think nobody's watching. And some happy endings are just the beginning of even better stories. 6 months later, Lysander proposed with a ring he'd designed himself and a speech he'd practiced with Mrs. Kim, who had very strong opinions about romantic declarations. Cordelia said yes before he finished the first sentence. 2 years later, Chen Blackwood Gallery opened its doors with a celebration that featured Korean BBQ, Mexican street tacos, and champagne that cost exactly as much as a normal person would spend on a nice dinner. It was perfect. 5 years later, their first child took her first steps in the gallery, surrounded by local art and the laughter of friends who'd become family. And they all lived happily, authentically, and completely, chaotically ever after.